Dustin, we have a great show lined up today. There's a lot of chatter in the market around composable CDPs. So we have the privilege today to talk with one of the key players driving the conversation. And I'm super excited to welcome Zach Van Doren, Senior Director of Alliances, Identity, and Ad Tech at ActionIQ, to our show. And we couldn't ask for anyone better to educate us and our audience on this topic. So Zach, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you, Kyle. Thank you, Dustin.
Yeah, it was great talking with you at CES back at the first of the year.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to thank you for joining us today. And so why don't you go ahead and start by giving our listeners a snapshot of your background and what brought you to this point in your career?
Well, thank you. Yeah, well, it's been a long, circuitous journey to get where I am today. You know, I've been 3 years at ActionIQ in this role, and going way back, I started in paid search, believe it or not. I started in paid search back in the late 90s. And this was wild west days of, going from kind of black hat SEO and then paid search just beginning to emerge in the market. And you had splintering of players across like Lycos and Alta Vista and Omniture and little search engine called Google, started to emerge in that time. And it was, and it provided me a foundation of very data-centric marketing, I think, if you will, right? And I really enjoyed that time. And so this was during the kind of the dot-com boom, and there was the bust during that time. If you recall, like paid search became like the one element of the internet economy that was running and working and actually making money during that time. And so I was kind of held on during that time. And as the market swung back, I broadened, so I went from just paid search into media. So I hopped from that agency to another agency and got into broader digital media planning strategy, but always kind of had that foundation of paid search, which gave me kind of very data-centric approach to it, right? So did that for a few years here in San Francisco, worked with a lot of brands, a lot of agencies, and then eventually got, I'd say, bored with the planning and strategic kind of elements of media, especially as Google, and Facebook really became predominant in that space from an inventory standpoint. So I just got bored with the duopoly that was occurring. And so I went more into the data side, right? So I went into from the media planning and buying strategic layers to the measurement, analytics, reporting layers, and did that and started leading those initiatives. And then from there, I started my own agency. So I saw like a big need in the market to help agencies get out of Excel-based reporting into web-based reporting and measurement and tying components together via APIs that are beginning to emerge. And then from there, started working with a startup called Datorama. And then I eventually became a pretty big services partner, and I built an agency around Datorama at the time. And then that led from, measurement and, media measurement analytics, then went into, okay, let's start talking about customer analytics, user-centric analytics that converges with media analytics. And then from customer analytics, got into, okay, we need to go upstream. We need to start looking at collection and refinement and ETLing and transform learning to inform the analytical models, right? So then got into tagging, and then broadened my agency to get into tagging, and then CDPs emerged, right? So let's go from tagging into, okay, from user-centric analytics and measurement, let's go into user-centric personalization and experience and aggregation and audiencing, and so got into CDPs. And eventually, we broadened my agency further to become a CDP tagging, media measurement, strategic kind of team, if you will, right? And that's actually when I started working with Acxiom, right? Because LiveRamp was a partner, and then there was the convergence of Acxiom and LiveRamp, and I was working with Datorama, and then Datorama acquired by Salesforce, and so I broadened and got to know a lot more of the market. I got really in depth and really into CDPs as a technology practice and space. and eventually decided to hop over from the agency services consulting side into the software side, right? So that's 20 years and like 3 minutes I just gave you all. What is very fun and what's very interesting right now is, as you know, the convergence of quote MarTech and ad tech. So me coming from this media ad tech background and then into MarTech and then seeing just this everything kind of coming together in this new convergence. For me, it's been very gratifying and fun, and I've done a lot of leadership in ActionIQ and in the market relative to that convergence and relative to kind of bringing media-based application, top of funnel planning practices and design into CDPs and applying that in a larger capacity. So
Yeah, that's a fantastic history there on not just your own journey, but the journey of the market. I mean, you've kind of been in all the right places along the way, and seeing a lot of what's happened over the past 20 years in both ad tech and MarTech industries.
I've seen a lot. Yes.
Yeah. So that is super cool. So thank you. You are definitely the guy we need to be talking to.
Yeah, Kyle. I would just say that I think we just listened to literally the history of the CDP and the underpinnings of, what actually started from, right? Starting with paid search. You talked about the .com bust, then the buildup of other digital channels that culminate, into a customer data platform. So, man, I'm looking forward to go back and listening to this podcast again, just to get a kind of a history on how this all came to being. And Kyle, like you mentioned, in the beginning, the word composable. So it's not just a CDP, a composable CDP, and that ActionIQ is taking on this kind of composable CDP strategy. So Zach, can you tell us a little bit of what composable means and why it's so important?
Well, yes. Let me back up a little bit to just define what is composable, because there's varying and evolved definitions of that, right? And it's similar to identity resolution, right? It's sort of you get a different definition depending on who you talk to, right? And so the way I look at it is you have almost like a broadband definition of composable, a broader definition of composable, which is, I think you would agree, with the modulation or the atomization of elements, functional components of a broader stack that would allow a brand to basically solution and design a very specific data and technology stack, picking and choosing components, modules, if you will, of data and technology to inform and enable a solution to the ultimate business problem, right? So that's in a broader sense what that means, like that modulation as opposed to a closed design, right?
Yep.
Then you have a more narrower definition, like a narrow band definition, right? Which is in the context of CDPs. And that is traditionally evolved into this disaggregation between the application layer and the data compute layer, right? Is what some CDs would define it as, right? And then in that narrowed definition, then you have CDP. You might have heard the bundled CDP definition. Bundled CDPs and composable CDPs. So bundled CDP, and that narrow definition means the application sits with the data storage and computation, right? So they're bundled together, the data application, right? And then a composable CDP in that narrow sense is the disaggregation of that data when that data stored and computed within cloud infrastructure, right? So Snowflake or Redshift or Databricks, data's there, computed there, the customer 360 infrastructure is set forth there. And then you have a CDP as an application layer on top of that. That is a means for marketing operations or media planners or channel managers to go into that application and to extract and enable experience delivery, experience design, journey design, right? independent owned. So that's like, again, it's important to set that lens, because what we look at it in the broader sense, right? A broadband sense of composable, right? So, and we approach it and we've designed our technology in the context of the broader definition of composable, right? Where if the client, the brand needs components where the data computation storage sits within the CDP environment to inform a specific use case, they have that, right? If they need certain data elements are in one cloud, but they're in another cloud, we can enable that, right? And so what we're seeing, especially in the enterprise space, is that they need just inherent underlying agility and they need inherent underlying solution power, right, to inform this, right? Like, not very few companies are in a place where they just have this beautifully structured data infrastructure within a Snowflake or Redshift environment, and it's just ready to be used by a personalization application layer that is moving one-to-one journeys at scale, right? Very few companies in the enterprise market have that, are in that state, right? And so the problem with these narrow definitions of composable is that it's a very limiting relative to how you can solution and solve business problems when you're dealing with such complexity, right? So that's how.
Yeah.
Just
No,
to give you a
that's
sense we look at it.
no, that's super helpful because,
Yeah.
as you said, so much of technology definitions are in who you're asking, right?
Yeah.
And so that's a great foundation there into really that disaggregation from the application to the data to the execute or compute layer, and certainly feels very apropos to the general strategy going on in the market around cloud, but moving from cloud as just being kind of a distributed compute function to now exposing it accessibly and nimbly into the application layer. Because a lot of people put stuff in the cloud and then it's like, well, now I got to take it out of the cloud to go do something with it, right?
Yeah.
And you had all that ingress, egress expense, kind of broke down the value proposition of the cloud in some way.
Exactly.
And then now you guys coming on top of that and actually, leveraging the data kind of where it sits and allowing for brands to kind of choose where it resides in the compute infrastructure of their choice, but still being exposed that into an application that's highly functional and can drive true journey. So
and you might have a brand running compute cost optimization processes and iterating across different clouds. I mean, you might have one where the media teams are using one cloud for MTA, measurement design. Another team is using another cloud for modeling and AI application layer and workbenching, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there you have that, right? Those are just very, very common examples, right? Where you need a true composable framework that can be very agile relative to these scenarios going on, right? And the other one that's is very critical and very important is it's not just cloud storage and computation in the marketing application. Like, it's also it also goes to the importance of at the point of data collection within the browser environments, right? And so critical to this foundation is that piece, and connecting with other identity spaces and other identity ecosystems that require addressability and in the context of emerging disruptions in the market, like we can talk about, right? So data collection is an integral and foundational piece of a broader composable design. So again, just to make the point, it's just not just storage and computation application. There's that piece as well.
Yeah, it seems like the days of the monolithic platforms are kind of over, right? It's like, if you think about what's happening in the entire MarTech, AdTech ecosystem, how many kind of new players are getting involved, even from AI, right? And brands are wanting to experiment with all these new tools and capabilities, and it kind of has to be interoperable. Yeah. So the thought of like buying into a monolithic platform, it just seems to go against the current. Thank you for sharing what it means to ActionIQ on Composable and articulating the depth of what that means. It really makes sense, like Kyle said, from a strategic perspective. Now you said a trigger word for Kyle and I, identity. We love to talk about identity. And I think it's interesting that you started there with the point of data ingestion, with the browsers.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about maybe some of the biggest challenges CDPs face in the identity space, and maybe some ways that you guys are overcoming those challenges?
Yeah, I mean, you could even say identity should and can be composable. A composable identity relative to the tactical functional components and relative to the underlying data services and ID spaces and graphs you would connect to, that it also should and can be composable, right?
Absolutely.
And a lot of the partnership work we've done with Acxiom is around that, right? Is being very agile and being very flexible in accordance to the client's need to solution together, right? With these components that you bring to the table and we bring to the table, right? So with regard to identity resolution, like now and how we look at it as a CDP is, again, going to like historical foundations and where we started and what's going on right now, right? So keeping in mind that the underlying function, the underlying sort of reason that we exist is to enable personalization at scale, right? Is to enable like relevancy of experience, relevancy of content, relevancy of communication across owned and increasingly now paid media at scale. Like this is the idea of one-to-one personalization at scale, right? And so in order to do that, you need to be able to deliver the experience, and you need to have some knowledge of that customer relative to their attributes, relative to their need, relative to their history, relative to how they've engaged with you as a brand, and you synthesize that knowledge of customer with the content and the medium you're delivering, right? So at the core, that is our function, right? That is our business objective, is that. So for that, we need, of course, you need the segmentation components, like you need the ability to create personalized and effective segmentations relative to those customer attributes. And you need the ability to activate the ability to create journeys and experience relative to that, right? So that's just application components. And then underlying that, you need the data foundations, right? So you need knowledge of customer, and that requires aggregation of all these disparate sources of data into a consolidated and cleansed sort of profile, if you will. And then you need called the addressability. You need the means to be able to address or serve or deliver experience to that profile, that consumer, right? So you have, and that goes to the identity resolution components, right? Is you have the need for a converged and master profile, if you will, and you need the means of addressability of that profile, right?
Yeah. And yeah, that's such a critical kind of statement to be making, right? in the context that there's what I would kind of call the inbound identity signals, how to pull those in, collect them, aggregate them, get that view of the profile.
That's right.
And then there's the outbound aspect of how do I now take that profile and distribute it or connect it effectively into the broader ecosystem.
That's right.
And that could vary by channel, right? Because going back to your original life, from search to all the other different addressable channels and even engagements of the specific consumer journey, on owned media, and even moving into physical interactions directly, like at point of sale and others.
That's right.
It's such a while conceptually it's so easy to just be like, well, it's an identity. Like you're just it's Kyle, and Kyle everywhere, and you can engage with him correctly. The challenge is that the signals that both Kyle provides in a consented fashion and what's also leveraged across a very diverse ecosystem can be varied, and so being able to manage that
Very, very, yes.
Is critical.
Yeah, and that goes too, as you said, the collection, right? At the point of signal collection. So consumer visits a web experience, they engage in some form of action with the web experience. So it starts at the point of those digital brand engagements, right? Like the composable solution has to informing and be like that collection component has to be a part and parcel of that composable design. Otherwise, you cannot you miss the inherent depth of signal and the inherent addressability design relative to starting to connect with other identity spaces and identity tokenizations that are now replacing third-party cookies. As the traditional way of doing all this would be to receive that signal within these digital environments and adhere and create a profile object using a third-party cookie, right, and use that as the means to substantiate a digital profile object. Use that as a means to measure and track user across the internet. Use that as a means to activate, using it as a means to measure output of that, right? So all that is disappearing, and everything is now converging into a first-party context structure. So this goes into the need of durable digital IDs, the ability to synchronize with other first-party identity spaces, the need to have a very tight synthesis with consent and permissioning components, right? And then the need to, of course, store and compute and provide an audiencing and segmentation layer to that, right? So go back to the identity. When I kind of composable identity, the way I look at it is like in three parts, right? You have identity in the context of this real-time web-based identity syncing. Some people call it identity edge or identity at the edge, and then you have identity stitching, which is the taking of disparate sources of data and converging that and converging these disparate sources based on deterministic probabilistic keys. And then you have resolution, not to be confused with stitching. Resolution, which is resolving the identity against some true set, some authoritative outside true set, right? And this could be an Acxiom graph, right, for instance. So that's how we look at it, and that goes then again to composability, and it goes again to what we do as technology, what let's say Acxiom would do as a data services provider, right? Working together and as part of this process of converging these components together.
Yeah, it makes sense too that having that composability on top of like the data clouds, like you mentioned, Snowflake, Databricks, they have their data, stored in these different locations. And, we're kind of seeing this trend of decentralization across the entire ecosystem, where now in these data clouds, if you have that composable, capability as a CDP where the marketer is actually doing the work, and being able to connect data across brands, maybe from brand to publisher that also have their data, sitting inside of these, environments like Snowflake, then it eliminates the need, right, to actually move, all the hops that data has had to make in the past, which I think, right, and, a lot of people call that like the clean room use case. But, in essence, it is, I think, better for the consumer. It's better for the brand. And it seems certainly to be the trend, how things are going to start working more and more going forward as it relates to activation and even measurement. All these use cases that we enable today is like the elimination of movement of data, right?
Yeah, we're seeing that. We're seeing that big time, right? And that goes back to the convergence of ad tech and martech and sort of mad tech, right? The elimination of hops, elimination of flows of data, the centralization of workflow, which a lot of that is enabled by these horizontal data layers, data lakes that are being brought to the market by Snowflake and Databricks and Redshift and those players, right? And these horizontal, I call them horizontal data lakes, right? Where we sit on top as a CDP. Acxiom is certainly an element of that, directly interfacing with that data environment. Clean rooms are connected to that to enable those joins with like advertiser to publisher joins, or BU to BU join, or reseller to manufacturer join, whatever the use case is, right? It's all an element, a kind of a hub. I'm sorry, a spoke within that hub, which is that data foundation, right? And that's the promise, right? I mean, I would argue that most brands are not there yet, right? And so again, that goes to our stance on a composable CDPs. There needs to be a hybrid of kind of cloud-based application layer and versus internal computation storage components, right? Because there just needs to have that agility in place.
Yeah, and and certainly the reality of the market and the evolution of technology is leading in this direction, right? With the aspect of, from a technological perspective, as you said, like optimizing where your data is and compute, and there's different reasons or different focuses that drive that, and certainly we know how large enterprises can have very different perspectives internal to different departments because their use cases differ, right? And I want to be compute heavy, or I want to do analytics, and I feel like Databricks, is more suited for my use. Hey, I'm more on the marketing side and I want to collaborate, so maybe it's a Snowflake, or maybe I'm just residing, I'm related to some government stuff, so I want to be in Azure or something. I mean, there's a lot of different aspects. You guys are approaching that. Talk to me for a minute, because you briefly mentioned it, and it was really around consent. Like, let's bring the consumer into this. So we've talked a lot about the ecosystem, the brand, and some of the relationships there. CDP, customer data platform, right? It's talking about the consumer. What's your strategy around that, specifically around consent and how you're composing that into your stack?
Well, it's a lot of it is I mean, talk about convergence, right? So I would say the inclusion of, or the convergence of, consent and permissioning protocols and layers within that customer journey is also paramount, right? Is also critical, right? And so when you have a brand and a consumer touch point, whether it be offline or it be online, and you have the medium or the media of that system powering the consent permissioning kind of components, then you need a centralization of that within a binded kind of profile object, right? And so so managing the components of consent and permissioning, and allowing a brand in a very efficient workflow design, again with minimal hops, minimal redundancies in that activation, audiencing workflow, in a way that is conformant to the permissioning consent frameworks that are established from that consumer, right? Is a big part of what we do as a technology solution, is to aggregate and centralize and create efficiencies relative to the recency of the permissioning and consent, and then all the disparate components that go into that, right? Because it's, from a tooling application standpoint, it's very highly complex and very challenging, right? It's quite challenging, right? So that's how we look at it, and that's how kind of we play a role in that, is to really inform and enable the brand to be compliant, to adhere to the governance structure, to reflect policies, permissions that they have been designed by them and how they want to relate and interact with their consumers. and provide them a means to do that. Provide the marketers and the business users a means to do that in a way that is compliant, permissioned, and respectful of that governance they've set.
Yeah. Well, I love that you guys are taking that perspective and that aspect of kind of facilitating the governance of that, right? Yeah. Because so often in technology, we get buried in ourselves and get kind of myopic on what we're looking to achieve, and sometimes we lose sight of that broader aspect, which ultimately we're here to engage consumers. And it doesn't matter if you're a brand, or a publisher, or technology provider within the ecosystem, that's really who we are ultimately reaching and interacting with. So it's great to hear that you guys.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll give you a really good example is, we have a lot of media clients, and a lot of them have adopted tactically in accordance to the VPPA compliance measure that you may have heard about, right? This is the need to maintain permissioning and privacy related to certain behaviors related to to video views, right? So watching a videos that contain specific title information, and keeping a privacy consent design wherein you're not connecting an individual user to the exact content of the video title, right? Like so disassociating that, right? And so they needed to do that to maintain compliance with that policy, the governmental policy. It was a very complicated and challenging process to enable that governance, right, against that policy, right? So again, like being very in a composable design, not to be cliched, and to be very agile and very solution oriented relative to solving that problem, right? Which again goes to point of collection, transformation and detailing of that data, management of those streams of data within other cloud environments or other publisher environments, et cetera, right? It's like an example of just helping tactically solve what is a very, very application intense process to maintain privacy, permissioning, governance that has been established either between the brand and the consumer, and or through other governmental bodies that are creating or providing the basis for that.
Yeah, and it certainly is a growing challenge, right, across the board, because with the evolution of the privacy landscape, both regulatory and driven just through consumer facing interaction, that as that complexity is put on top of it, it's driving a degree of fragmentation, and and then there's some argument maybe against that some may be weaponizing kind of that to raise their walls more or different things. But what's happening is that layer is impacting the full stack. It's not just at the browser level, right? It's people kind of simplifying, like, oh, privacy, it's about the browser. And it's like, no, I mean, that permeates all the way down to the depths of the data layer and the governance associated with all of that. And you call out a great, like in some ways, a very narrow example, yet even that example, you see multiple players, multiple different mechanisms by which you have to adhere to that and manage that governance. And then that's just like one channel. That's just one channel of an overall ecosystem that you're having to do that across all of those. So
that's right.
I think you guys are poised to provide a great value to brands as part of that to, simplify, because we live in this weird dichotomy, right? All this complexity and these external forces are kind of injecting more complexity, yet the need with our customer set is to simplify. How do you bring that simplification, because it's so overwhelming at times, to the marketer, and the marketer's just like, I just want to talk to the person. At the end of the day, that's what they want to do. They want to present a value to the customer and have a transaction, and yet there's all this complexity. And so I think you guys are well poised for that.
I'm still on the hook for driving net new incrementality.
Exactly.
Market share growth, right? I'm still on the hook even more so, right? So
Absolutely.
how do I solve this business problem?
Yeah.
And how do I empower my teams to be simple, right? So,
well, speaking of that incrementality and kind of where the market's going, Zach, no, we're kind of closing in on the end of our time, but we always like to hear, from our guests, what has you most excited about the next 12 months?
Oh, I think I mean, it goes back to my old days in paid search. It reminds me of just a time of mass experimentation, innovation, trying things that will fail, things will succeed. Um, um, a burst of creativity in the process of facing and solving these challenges in the market. To me, that's super exciting, right? Just the creative energy that's being put into this and the innovation around that, and the understanding. Well, yes, we will try and we'll break things, but we'll push through and we'll create new paradigms relative to this disruption going on. And to me, that's super exciting. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And Zach, one, I just want to say thank you. And to all of our listeners are going to want to say that as well.
Awesome.
For the vast amount of knowledge that you share. And at Acxiom, we thank ActionIQ for your partnership.
Thank you.
And the innovation that you are bringing to the market. I think that the composability, is spot on. And we look forward to seeing, the success of ActionIQ over these coming days and months and years. And for our listeners, that's a wrap. We're going to go ahead and put a close to this one. You can find all of our Real Identity podcast episodes at acxiom.com/real talk, or find us on your favorite podcast platform. Until next time, thank you.